Hi, everybody. I'm Malik Pancholi, and I'm the co-founder of Act to Change, a national nonprofit dedicated to ending bullying for Asian American and Pacific Islander youth. Welcome to our very first classroom convos. So it's August. Maybe some of you are still on summer vacation or school's just about to start. I can imagine that the last thing you want to do is be in class again. But I promise you that this will be educational, informative, but it's also going to be a fun and interactive way to dig into some issues that I know that you are all thinking about. We also have an amazing, amazing teacher who I am very excited to introduce you to. So please join me in welcoming Richard Leong. Richard is a very good friend of mine. Hey, Richard, you're there. Richard's a really good friend of mine. He's a tireless and passionate board member here at Act to Change. And when he isn't putting together workshops for us, he works as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. He is a former fifth grade teacher who spends his time now helping adults think about race and racism. Hey, Richard.
Hey Malik, how's it going?
Good. I'm very excited to be a part of this this classroom convo today with you. So, Richard, you just like I mentioned to the participants, it's the end of summer. Why should young people or even adults who are on this call today be doing a seminar called Classroom Convos, and why are you leading it in August?
Yeah, well, first off, like, dude, let's be real. Like, did we really have a summer this year? Like, I don't know. I feel like time's just been all over the place ever since the
March,
pandemic hit. Yeah.
November, who knows?
Yeah, but I feel like in terms of actually answering your question, I feel like in many ways, what we're trying to do here with this workshop today is we're actually trying to catch up to the youth. We're actually trying to catch up to what many folks, including our young folks, and especially our young folks, have already been doing for the last few months. Um, you know, uh, just to share a little bit more about myself and where all of this kind of comes together from. After the murder of George Floyd, I was sort of just sitting in my apartment and feeling all sorts of ways, obviously. But one of the biggest things was that I just felt sort of useless slash helpless to others. And so, as many folks on this call know, and you have been a great help with uplifting this as well, I started doing free coaching conversations for Asian Americans. And within the first month, I had over 100 people reach out, chatted with 50 folks over the course of that time in the next month. And by and large, what a lot of those conversations were really diverse. Lots of people asked about all sorts of things, but by and large, the number one question that I kept getting from people were, how do I talk to my parents about what's going on? How do I talk to XYZ people about Black Lives Matter? How do I talk about this with my friends while I'm still trying to figure it out? So, I found myself having the same conversation over and over, and I don't have all the answers, but I figured, let's just all get in a room together to talk about it. If all of us are having these conversations individually, then we should all just like get together to talk about it together, right? Like we should all just like work together on this.
That's amazing. I mean, I remember when we held a solidarity combo to talk about how Asian Americans can support Black Lives Matter. I remember too feeling very much like, gosh, race is so challenging, race is so difficult. You want to get it right, so it's like can feel very scary to talk about. But then on the other hand too, there's that thing of we don't all have the same opinions because we don't all have the same education. We don't have all the same understanding around things. And so I know for myself, it is challenging to talk to people who I assume have differing viewpoints than I do because it can feel really scary. And sometimes you don't have all the information to back it up. You know that you're right, but maybe you're not right. It's like all those things that are so challenging. Well, so I know that part of what we're gonna do today, and by the way, I'm gonna hop off here in just a minute and let Richard take over, and it's gonna be interactive with everyone who's on the webinar. So you guys are gonna get to participate very, very soon. But can you tell us a little bit about what it is that we're going to be doing today? And then I have a question too, because I know that you're promoting your work through a screen name called Adjust Your Boba. And I want to know what that means and make sure that people know that they can follow you there as well.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of what we're going to do today, so yeah, I'd love to just sort of frame some and set some expectations and do some framework for folks. So in terms of what's going to happen here, y'all. So over the course of the next 20 or 30 or so minutes, I'm going to just lead a workshop with all of us together. Zoom is weird. Like it's gonna not be the best thing ever, right? It's not going to replicate like the quality of an in-person experience and all that, but I'm going to do my best here. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to be sharing my screen again. I have a couple of slides for us to run through. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions in the chat. So folks who are joining us via within Zoom, like find yourself, like try to get comfortable, like full screen it. I don't know, like do whatever you got to do to be able to engage and like, try to have the chat visible because I'm going to be asking a lot of questions through that. For folks that are watching us live through Facebook and other platforms, you're more than welcome to participate as well in the chat there. I'm not gonna be able to see it right now. I'm being totally honest with y'all. Like I got a lot, like this is enough for me to like just manage right now. But I promise y'all, I'm gonna go back and like look through the Facebook live streams. I'd love to see some comments and chats there as well. So that's gonna be what it looks like for the next 20 or 30 or so minutes. And then after the workshop sort of completes, I'll stop sharing my screen and Malik, you'll hop back on and together we'll have some time for questions. So I guess that's a good time to also lift up for folks. Feel free to ask questions throughout the workshop and put it out on the Q&A tool, and we'll hit those up at the end of their time together.
Yeah,
I completely forgot your second question.
well,
What was that again?
I haven't forgotten it. We're definitely going to be monitoring questions and have a little time for general Q&A at the end, like Richard said. So please put them on there. And we do, even though we can't see them necessarily on the Zoom, the comments that you all put on Facebook and wherever else you're watching this they're really helpful to us. So please do use that feature. So my other question to you was adjust your boba.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you. Yeah. So um, I think where it came out from was just like I just wanted a place that was going to be publicly accessible and just sort of start collecting and putting resources together, right? To be a resource for folks. And so in terms of the name, Adjust Your Boba, I'm not gonna lie, like it was like a 2-hour window where I just sat on the floor and I was like, what is like a cool and like I want to be cool. Like how do I be cool and funny? And like it's just like. And I have many folks to thank that sort of came up with this idea with me like throughout the thing. But what we ended up with was Adjust Your Boba because I wanted something that would sort of speak to Asian Americans. Obviously, like not all Asian Americans drink or even like boba. So like I recognize there's a tremendous diversity within our AA community, much less the AAPI community. But I felt like, I have the privilege of living in the San Gabriel Valley where it is very normal to go into a boba store and people ask you like, what level of sugar do you want? How much ice do you want? And like, I honestly believe it becomes much like this part of your identity that you have like a way that you order your drinks, right? So much as we need to like adjust our boba orders into what fits, what feels right for us. I felt like the coaching conversations that I was having, I really tried to keep them to one-on-ones because I really felt like folks needed a space to be able to ask questions, right? That felt right for them. There are so many resources online. There are so many reading lists. There are so many podcasts. And I genuinely believe that for all of us, especially those of us who identify as non-Black people of color, like we should be doing the work ourselves, right? But as non-Black people of color, like we also like live at the intersection of so many systems of privilege and oppression. And as an educator, I understand that it can be easier to have someone to talk to, right? Just to ask questions. And so that's sort of the story behind the whole Instagram account and the title. Is it fun? Is it cool? I don't know. Like, I hope it is.
It's so cool and so fun. We are not worthy. It is so cool. All those hours playing on your floor, agonizing over it, paid off for sure. So I'm gonna hand this off to Richard, but before we do, I just want to say one last thing, and that is Richard mentioned that young people and people of all ages, in fact, across the country and around the world, have been having these conversations all summer long and possibly even longer, of course. And I just want to just put out there that Act to Change has been a part of that movement as well. As you all know, we launched COVID Convos in I believe it was early March when COVID hit the United States in such a horrible way, and there was such a awful rise in incidents of hate and violence and bullying against Asian Americans. We then hosted a solidarity convo to show Asian American support for Black Lives Matter. And we hosted a pride convo to support LGBTQ youth and also tie in the movement with Black trans lives matter. So we've been a part of this conversation around race for a while now, and I encourage you all to check out those videos on our website and on our Facebook page as well. And this is our very first classroom convo. So you are all a part of something very, very special, but we hope to host many more of these in the future. And with that, I will give it over to Richard. I'm going to still be here, but I'm going to turn my video off. So if you need me for anything, Richard, just let me know and I'll hop back on. But I will see you in, I guess, 20 or 30 minutes to talk about what happened here. All right, have fun.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and get us started here. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. Hopefully folks can see that. Alrighty here. Alrighty. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, everyone. I'm super, super excited for this. I'm really, really excited. Hope this goes well. So first things first, I want to start off with a couple of objectives just so that folks can understand, what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to work through together. What I'd love is for folks to be able to walk away from this workshop together, being able to, number one, identify our fears and challenges with holding conversations about race and racism. And number two, also be able to describe solutions and strategies to be more effective at these conversations. Before I keep going, I want to lift up something. Some folks in the chat were asking earlier, like, I can't see other people's chats and comments. That's intentional. So chats are one way right now, just because we want folks to be able to focus on what's happening here. But no worries, I can see everything that's coming in. So if y'all have questions, and I will be asking questions actually for you to answer, like feel free to pop those in the chat. All right, I'm going to keep us moving here. So just a couple of shared assumptions. I do this professionally as a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant, and I often come into spaces where I don't really know the folks beforehand. I don't really know, what conversations have happened already, what the level of background knowledge is. And what I want us to do is just to start off with some shared assumptions. And what I mean by this these are things I'm not really going to explain. I'm just going to kind of just be like, all right, we just assume that these are things that we all believe to be true. And yeah, we're just gonna go with that. So shared assumption number one, we are all experts of our lived experience. What we feel and know is real. Number two, just kind of slightly attention perhaps with the first one, is we all have blind spots into areas of growth. The third thing that I'll also lift up here is that there are many forms of activism and ways to contribute to social justice, and everybody deserves to work in ways that feel right for them. I really genuinely believe this, and that there are so many ways to show up in this moment right now, and folks have the right to look for things that feel liberating and feel right for ourselves, and that looks different for everyone, right? At the same time, just to put that in a little bit of contrast, or just to put that in conversation, I also want us to believe at the same time that we also recognize that the most effective and or needed tactics may not be what we're comfortable with, right? And I think, over the last few months, I think lots of folks have really sort of grappled with what is their feelings around disruptive protest, right? And what is the efficacy of disruptive protest? I want to lift this up as a shared assumption, just to say that, oftentimes we might want to believe that activism is going to be fun and easy and comfortable, and it really isn't always, right? Like we're up against really deeply entrenched systems of oppression, and so the things that may be most necessary for us to affect change in this world may not be things that we're comfortable with, right? And obviously that level of comfortability or discomfortability looks different for all sorts of folks, all right? All right, so what I'd like to do now is go ahead and start us off with our first question here. I'd love for folks to respond in the chat with what's your name, where are you joining us from, and just how are you feeling today? Let's just do a quick check-in. How are folks feeling today? I'm gonna pause here just for a second. Seeing lots of folks that are excited that it's a Friday. We've got some folks from outside of the US. I'm so grateful for joining. I don't know what time it is for y'all, but thank y'all. Got some folks from the East Coast. Oh man, I hope that hurricane treated y'all okay. I know it was a little rough this week. Lots of folks saying they're feeling good, feeling calm. Some folks a little bit sleepy because of the time zone difference. So folks are feeling grateful. Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here with y'all. Alrighty. If folks are still finishing up your answer, go ahead and finish that up. I'm going to keep us moving here. All right, next one. Just to open it up a little bit, I'd love for folks to share, what is a sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch that reminds you of home? I know that question might be a little bit out of left field for some of y'all. Just bear with me for a little bit here. I promise I'll make sense of it later. Alrighty, so some folks are sharing lots of smells here. Food, yeah, food keeps coming up. Yeah, lots of food. Garlic and onions, wow. Yes, amazing. Before I even figure out what I'm gonna cook, oftentimes I'm like garlic and onions in the pan first. Some folks are talking about the view. Some folks are talking about some specific things that happen at home. Shout out to Brienne for the smell of spam. Love it. Yes. All right, I guess we're all getting hungry together. That's what's happening on this call. Great, thanks y'all. For folks who are still chatting, go ahead and finish that up. I'm gonna keep us moving to our next question here. And I've got, there's this one and then there's one more before I kind of move us into our main content. So the first one here I'd love for folks to respond is, what are some fears and challenges that you have about holding conversations about race and racism? What are some fears and challenges that you might have about holding conversations about race and racism? And these could be things that you're just feeling even before you've had the conversation, and or things that you've experienced as you've had these conversations over the last few months, or even before. All right, we've got a lot here. I'm just gonna try to rapid fire kind of group these into categories. I'm seeing a lot of folks that are worried about saying the wrong thing, which could look like a lot of things. That could look like not being articulate. It could look like being corrected with a fact that you don't know about. It could look like just getting embarrassed and just kind of being put out there. Some folks are lifting up, seeing a lot of folks lift up this piece around the response that other people might give them. So I'm seeing a lot of folks that are really struggling with like, I'm just like really dealing with folks that are really closed-minded or defensive. There's this piece around emotion that is coming up from a lot of folks' responses. Love that. Some folks are like worried about this, like this criticism of being quote unquote overly emotional. Yep. Some folks are lifting up this piece around just how limited, just how little background knowledge there seems to be that we can sort of assume that folks have just based on what we learn and what we don't learn through a public education system. I also want to name and lift up that there's a lot of folks that are like really vulnerable right now and are sharing a lot of hesitancy that comes from their own identities and the ways that their identities relate to others, right? So some folks just sharing like at one level, like I just don't feel like I have enough experience or enough knowledge. Some folks are worried about crossing some racial divisions here, like so much here. I appreciate this. Thanks y'all, I really appreciate it, and that's really helpful. The next question that I'll lift up here before we keep moving forward here is, in conversations about race and racism, what have you seen and or experienced to be effective? And it's totally okay if it doesn't work all the time. I just love to hear from folks, what have you seen and experienced to be effective, even if it's only partially effective or not all the time, only under this like one specific situation that it worked out well, like whatever folks are seeing here. This is interesting. The first three folks in a row all wrote the same thing. They wrote listening. That's 4 now. The first 4 folks have all said listening. So there's a piece around listening to others. There's a piece here around intentionality, just like how do you want to approach this conversation? There's a piece here as well around willing to be wrong. Yes, the growth mindset piece, right? Centering and uplifting Black voices, yes. Not setting oneself up as an expert, yep. The growth mindset piece. Oh, this is interesting. There's a thread here from a few folks around this piece around emotion. So tying back to that emotionality piece around the fears, some folks are also lifting up that it's really helpful and it's been effective to be understanding for other folks' emotions. So recognizing that emotions have like a really like important part in this conversation, which we're going to come back to for sure. Amazing. All right, thank you so much, y'all. For folks that are still finishing up their answers, feel free to keep going there. I appreciate that, y'all. All right, So what I want us to do here is kind of move into the one and only poll that we have here. I'm trying something new out, folks. Like I'm trying to get better at using these Zoom tools. But what I've got here is a poll. And I want you to like imagine that, you know, you are perhaps a new parent and you're headed out of town for a week or so, and you've got a choice between two babysitters. It's a completely hypothetical situation here, right? On the one side, we've got the professional babysitter with a PhD in child development and nutritional science, just moved in across the street last week, willing to do it for free. On the other side, option B, we've got the childhood best friend, lived next door all your life, not going to do it for free, wants you to pay them back with milk, tea, and dinner next week. I see some folks responding in the chat. Thanks so much. I'm actually going to go ahead and launch a polling tool here. So for folks that are watching us or joined us rather through Zoom, that poll should have just popped up for folks. I'm going to keep this open just for about 10 or so more seconds to let folks pop their answers in here. All right, we've got about half or so of the folks that voted. If you haven't, go ahead and fill that in, please, in the next 5 seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. So I hope folks can see this, but basically we've had around 88% of folks share option B, the childhood best friend, and about 12% of us shared option A. Thanks so much, y'all. I appreciate y'all for engaging in that. So this is not a question that I came up with. This is from another book from Simon Sinek. But there's the piece around here that I want to lift up is there is something about the childhood best friend. There's something about the relationship that we have with them that makes us willing to trust them further, right? There are so many professional credentials that come with a person in option A within the PhD in child development and nutritional science, right? There's all this credibility that is associated with that babysitter. And yet for some reason, there's something about our trust that gravitates us towards the person that we have known for a long time, right? And I don't think this is a surprising result for most folks, recognizing obviously that not everyone chose that one, but I think most folks could have, predicted this. The reason why I want to bring this up is because when it comes to having conversations about race and racism, so many of y'all lifted up around that question that I asked earlier around the fears and challenges. So many of y'all lifted up this piece around, I'm worried that I don't know the right thing. I'm worried that I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm worried that I don't know enough and I'm not able to engage in this conversation. And the reason why I wanted to put this question up here as a thought exercise is just to show that, like, when it comes to having these really difficult conversations, there's a piece around trust that is deeply, deeply necessary to be able to have them in a productive, healthy way. And to be able to have that trust, there's a piece around relationships and how intimate we are with one another, the way that you are with your childhood best friend and not with the person who just moved in like last week, right? There's a piece around that intimacy that develops these really strong relationships that allows us to be able to engage in these conversations. What I want us to think about here is actually this piece around the trust equation. It's not something I came up with, but I found it to be fairly helpful when I think about difficult conversations I've needed to have in work and in life. So for folks that haven't seen this before, I'm just going to like break it down super briefly. So the way that this person like theorizes how we think about trust is to think about it as credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by this variable of self-orientation. Right. I'm going to explain what all those things mean, but just kind of lifting this up, tying it back to what I was saying earlier, that credibility piece that holds back so many of us from these conversations, that is so part of the fear that we experience. That is only one of 4 variables in terms of thinking about trust, which I correlate to the amount of influence that we might have with someone in a really difficult conversation, right? For those of you who are like really good at math, which I was not when I was a kid, right? I think you'll also recognize that in terms of like which variable has the most power over the overall, the quotient here, it's this piece around self-orientation, right? Because you're dividing by that number as opposed to these other variables that you're adding by. Let me explain what this looks like or what this really means in just a second here. Okay, so breaking it down here, credibility is how much does this person know about the subject? Reliability is how dependable has this person been in my life? Intimacy, how safe and secure do I feel with this person? And self-orientation is how selfish and how self-centered is this person, right? Now, I want to name something, right? Like in these like points here, like I'm not actually talking about how much like you are like in any sort of like objective or term, if that's even possible, which I don't think that it is. It's really about the image that you have. It's really about like how well does how does that person see you, right? So for example, like excuse me, you might be like the most credible person on this, but if that person like does not like see that in you, then like there's a piece there's a piece there that's missing, right? It's not actually about what you have, it's about how they see you, right? And so excuse me, let me grab some water here. So when we talk about self-orientation, I'm just going to focus on that piece there, right? The piece here is that, you know, if I'm talking to someone and through the past experiences that I've had with them, I really feel and believe them to be like an incredibly selfish person, then it actually like matters very little, like how much credibility, reliability, or intimacy I have with them, right? Because then I'm dividing by like this really large like S number, right? I'm like dividing by this large value of self-orientation. But if I find that they're someone that I believe to be very selfless, right, then the value of that S shrinks, and so I'm dividing by a much smaller number, right? The value of the other factors begins to become much more powerful, and like we can leverage those deeper, right? Okay, so I just want to pause here for a second and ask folks just to like react to this, because I know I've thrown a lot at you in a second, right? As you look at this, equation, how does this connect to the past experiences that you've had talking about race and racism? Do you feel like you were talking with someone that you had a really strong level of reliability? Had y'all like been dependable with one another in the past? Were you talking with someone you had really high intimacy with or really low intimacy with? Was it someone that you just met on the internet and you just got into a Facebook like argument with, right? That's someone that doesn't really know you, right? And so there's less intimacy, there's less of all these things, right? I'd love for folks to just to share a couple of reactions here on how you're connecting this. All right, so I'm seeing Christine is still thinking about this piece around self-orientation. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's like a lot. I know, it's like a lot. A couple of folks here definitely help explains the piece around internet conversations, no relationship, little trust. I love this. Okay, so some folks are lifting up this piece around like are criticizing this equation and questioning, you know, whether or not it's truly applicable to all folks. Some folks are lifting up like different cultural backgrounds, right? I love that. That's like 100% valid, right? One of the things that I would sort of just to like push on that thread a little bit is I'd love for folks to think about, okay, then thinking about, you know, whatever variations you like, what are the specific variations that you might make to this model, right? Okay, awesome. Yeah. So I want to lift up this question here also, or this comment here from Kyosin. It's interesting because I've also been in AAPI, Black Lives Matter groups, BLM groups, where people trusted each other without knowing each other very well yet. But we all had the common goal of wanting to do something for BLM in our lives, right? I love that. I love that point because I wonder if there's something about, you know, the nature of the gathering of the space, like the way that y'all have like, the format or the conditions that y'all have come together on that actually establishes a little bit of that shared intimacy or that shared sort of reliability, right? There is something about just like, wow, like this is a space or this is a community or this is a whatever that is like specifically geared towards being anti-racist, and we have all shown up, right? I wonder if there's something about that piece of just like coming together, right? Awesome. Okay, thanks so much, folks. I really appreciate y'all for engaging with this. The next thing that I want to push us to is this metaphor of there's this cup of water. So I forget, somebody gave me this a couple of years ago, and it's been really, really helpful as I've like navigated my own challenges with mental health and mental confidence, which I just kind of put together. I think many of us are familiar with the old adage, it's all over social media about like, you know, you can't, like if you empty your cup, then like there's little that you can do, right? You have to refill your cup. You have to find activities that refill your cup and refill your confidence and refill your mental health and all of that. Like these conversations about race and racism are like incredibly draining. They're incredibly emptying. They're incredibly scary, right? For so many of us, especially those of us that are people of color, it's so challenging because we don't know if walking into this conversation, we're going to be speaking with someone who's going to deny the validity of our lived experience, if they're going to dehumanize us, if they're going to really sort of just attack the things that we know and believe to be true about our own lives and our families and our communities, right? So I want to lift up that like all of this stuff like is draining, right? It is, these are things that empty our cup, right? The other piece that I also want to lift up here is that what's really hard about these conversations is they can often lead to gaslighting, even if it's not like interpersonal, even if that person's not like questioning your like reality, questioning your understanding of what happened. Sometimes in the ways that we process like afterwards, right? We are like, now I'm starting to question, like, was it just me? Was that only a thing that happened to me? It's like a whole thing, right? The other thing I also want to lift up is this piece around curated storytelling. So for many of us that work in spaces where we have to leverage our stories of our experiences for others to try to like, I don't know, like push like a policy or like advocate on a specific issue, right? There's this piece around like, I need to make meaning of how terrible my lived experiences have been so that I can get other people to like me and like what I'm trying to do, right? There's this piece around curating our storytelling for the lens of others. And that is an inherently draining piece because what we are doing is we are taking our own lived realities and we are trying to alter them to make them quote unquote useful, right? And so I just want to contrast that with some other ways that we can think about, you know, how do we restore our own mental health and confidence, right? It's incredibly important to be in spaces where you are affirmed, validated, and cared for, right? There's a lot of language on the internet and in social media about self-care. There's a lot of like, you gotta take care of yourself. And like, that's real, like super, super real, super, super valid, right? Love that. But I also believe that like, that's a very individualistic notion and there's only so far you can go with individualism. There's a huge piece around community care that I also want to lift up. It's important to be with people that are going to like really take care of you, right? And there's another thing here too around reflection, processing, ownership. You don't have to engage in every single conversation, right? Obviously, right, we have to engage in conversations to be able to move things forward, but you don't have to engage in every single one, especially if you're not set up for it. Like if you're just fundamentally not set up for it, then it's not going to be good for you, right? And then the last piece, just to like pull a bit of attention to that curated storytelling piece, I really encourage folks to take time to just do some authentic and self-driven reflection about your own stories. And these aren't things that have to be shared with others. If anything, like that's the point, right? The point is that like, it's for you, right? And so there's a piece around authentic storytelling that I'd really encourage folks to spend some time and energy thinking about. Find ways that are helpful for you to like make sense of your own lived reality and your own stories. All right. Whew, okay, I know that was a lot, but I want to like make time. I want to like make sure like we're able to finish on time and all that. So I'd love to just kind of close out here with two final questions. Number one, you know, I'd love to like just ask folks, you know, as you are leaving this short time that we spent together, what are you leaving this workshop thinking about? What are you thinking about? What is top of mind? What are your main takeaways? So some folks are thinking about their own environments. Some folks are thinking about how do they want to create spaces that work for them, that are more filling versus draining. Some folks are asking about that equation. I love this point from Edith here, continue to engage with others that validate me in order to process. Definitely rest, y'all. Like we're going through a lot. Like we are navigating terrible economy, once in a generation pandemic, national uprisings that shake and question the foundations of systemic racism. This is really interesting. Someone also lifted up this piece around around like how and when do you engage, right? I think that goes back to the first shared assumption, right? I think we all recognize that there's so much work to be done and the world will be a better place for all the work that we do. But at the same time, we also recognize that we can't do everything at the same time, right? So like there's a piece of tension there. Great. And some folks, I think about actions as we leave, like we can't just like learn and think about things. We also have to like do things, right? Some folks are already like putting this in the chat, but what are you leaving this workshop wanting to do? And if it's helpful, one framing that I often offer folks is, what do you want to start doing, stop doing, and or keep doing? What do you want to start doing, stop doing, and or keep doing? So we've got some folks talking about wanting to keep making connections, keep leaning in, keep doing self-care, continue conversations like these. There's power in coming together. Folks are speaking about wanting to keep building relationships. Some folks are talking about ways to continue building your credibility, being comfortable with discomfort. Yes, I love that. Keep involving and building relationships with Black brothers, sisters. Yes. Yeah. I love the true diversity in the comments that I'm seeing in the chat here, right? I think it lifts up that like truly like there is so much work for all of us to do. And there are so many ways that we can continue to engage. All right. I think that's pretty much it from me on this side. This is the end slide, but we're not done yet. I want to invite Malik back up here so we can have a quick conversation and maybe take a couple of quick questions. Plus, we also have like a lot of people to thank today.
Hey, Richard. I'm back.
Hey, how did that go for you? I know you were like in the chat.
Yeah, that was incredible. It was, I learned so much. It was super engaged. Also, I think we have like several hundred people participating via different formats. And I got to say, like, I was privy to see what people were writing. I hope that that's okay, that people feel comfortable with that. As a host here, I was able to see the answers you put in. And it was remarkable how much unity there is, and also how much openness there is, and how much just like deep reflection there was to see. So I'm so grateful for everyone who participated.
So much unity, but also so much diversity, right? Like folks are really thinking about all sorts of things as they walk away from this workshop, and that makes me think like, dude, like I don't know, like what we're gonna do for the next one, right? Like it's clearly like folks have so many different needs, and there's so much out there. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I'm just like processing.
Yeah, it was very diverse, but I also, I was really struck by, and maybe this is coming from my own filter and my own lens, because I think I responded to a few of the questions you posed from an emotional perspective, but I saw a lot of emotion in people's answers, and I think that there was also a lot of response to this idea that these conversations can be tiring and challenging. You have to take rest and refill, and
Yeah.
in a way that gave me a lot of hope, because that means I feel like a lot of people who are tuning in are actually actively engaged in this process already, which is why they understand what that feels like. So that what I thought was really interesting. What was your feelings? How did it go for you leading this?
Terrifying as always, because like I thrive off of actually being able to see people, and the most common trick that I use when I lead anything is always like turn and talk to your neighbor, and like then let's come back together. And I can't do that, which is like really hard.
Yeah.
But I think it was okay. I think as I'm thinking about it, I do really appreciate the level of vulnerability that so many folks had with you and I, just like strangers on the internet, right? Like I really appreciate that. I do think that like, one of the ways that I think the trust equation was, something that I wish I had spent a little bit more time on, because I was just reflecting back on that. Like, there's so much more that I feel like I could have done to like break that down for folks. But I hope it's useful for folks just in terms of like naming, like when a conversation goes wrong, like I hope it's useful for folks to like process that after the fact, right? To like pull it up and be like, all right, so like what exactly happened here? Because so many times, like for example, like so many folks that I chatted with in my coaching conversations would say like, I brought up this fact, I brought up this like history example, I brought up this thing that happened, whatever, and it just like didn't work. And it seemed like no matter how many stories, no matter how many facts I presented them, they like wouldn't listen to me and recognize that systemic racism is real, right?
Yeah.
And to me, like putting that in the language of that equation, that's like, okay, like you're really like using the credibility piece, right? Like you're pulling out a lot of facts and history here, but that's just not landing with that person, right? So rather than trying to like add more credibility, add more facts, like what is another way that we can approach this conversation?
Yeah. And it's like, I also, for as many people who are engaged and fighting the good fight and having the conversation, one person's negativity can really take you down. You know what I mean? It can be so challenging and make you question everything. One of the things that really stood out for me, and I saw some people saying that they couldn't hear me. So I hope my microphone issue, I may be sitting too far away from the computer. Can you guys hear me now? I'm going to take that as a yes. I was going to, okay, good. So I was just going to say that one of the things that stood out for me in your very first slide was that idea that what we feel and know is real. And I think that so often, even though our experience, my own experience with being on the receiving end of racism or having a microaggression thrown at me, it can be devalued when someone else questions your feelings around that. And, and that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to respond to that, but we have to trust that our experiences matter. So I wanna pop in. There's a couple questions. I know we only have a few minutes left here. So are you down to take some questions from our audience?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Of course. I'm happy to try. I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to try.
Yeah. So the first one's a very big one, and I think we began to touch on it in this workshop. But how can we respond to racism among extended family members?
Oh,
I know.
oh gosh.
Hard
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Well, do you have any thoughts on that one? Because I think you and I have talked about this before, haven't we, actually?
Well, I mean, I just want to bring it back to this workshop and say that I think, one of the things that stood out for me in that formula, and I saw a lot of people putting this in about the self-centered piece, was that can be a big deterrent. And when we know the other person is going to be coming from only their perspective and isn't going to be open to ours, for me, I know that can be a big, um, it's not even worth having the conversation at all. So I think that maybe just answering from my own perspective, I think one of the challenges is willing, like you said, to be uncomfortable. Like you said that activism isn't always fun. It isn't always comfortable. Is the willingness to engage in that conversation anyway. But I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah. I don't have so often, many times, like people, many times I think we look for like practical like solutions, and we associate practicality with ease, and like practical things, like truly practical things against racism, like are not going to be easy, right? Like it's like not the same thing. What that question makes me think about is, I think a lot of us put a lot of pressure on ourselves for this conversation to be perfect the first time, because there's a sense that if I don't get it right the first time, then like I'm never going to have the chance to get it right ever again, right? And when it comes to people who are our family members, for better or worse, both sides at the same time often, these are folks that we're probably going to interact with multiple times over the course of our lives, right? And so if it's any like consolation or solace that I could offer that question, that person who asked that question, I wonder if there's something around just taking the pressure off of like feeling like you have to get it right all at once, and also like limiting the scope of that conversation, right? So rather than taking it to the large like system, rather than thinking large like at this large like incredibly nebulous system of oppression, like focus it in on like a very specific story or a very specific incident that's on the news that week or something like that, you know.
That's fantastic. So another question is, my biggest issue is that most of the time Americans don't understand AAPI history in the United States. So it becomes a history lesson and we never get to actually having a discussion. How can we educate the masses? These are very big questions. These are very
Yeah.
big questions, everyone.
Yeah, and this is obviously work that like you and I both deeply care about, right? Like, there's a reason why like we put ourselves out there as in terms of the ways that we talk about our own communities, right? Yeah, so this is hard. What I appreciate now, and this is something that I feel like is such a great privilege to be an educator, is that I often find myself in conversations with young people, and like young people get it, like young people have it, you know. And so like one thing that I think about is, you know, look and turn to like young folks in your community, and look at what young folks are putting out there on the internet as well as resources, right? I know we're going to talk about this later, but like we have like a whole 40-page toolkit thing that just got put up on our website thanks to some phenomenal interns. But that's like the one thing is that I always look to young folks to like lead the change, right? The other piece that I'll also share is that, you know, I think thankfully there was a PBS documentary that came out like a month ago, or maybe my conception of time is like all over the place, but like there's a PBS documentary that I about Asian American history that I watched, and I was like, wait, like this is the thing that like I needed like all of my classmates to watch in high school together, right? Like when we had a sub and like the TV was rolled in on the cart with the VHS machine, which does not happen anymore. But like when that was a thing, like I desperately needed people to watch that, right? And so as much as we can, you know, there are resources out there. They're a little hard to find. I'm not gonna lie, they're hard to find, but there are resources out there that folks have made and are doing a phenomenal job of building that level of consciousness in our country.
And I would just say too that I think that one of the things that we're trying to do at Act to Change, one of the things I think is very important for organizations who are doing this educational work as part of what we do, is to push to get this education into curriculums and into the school systems already, so we don't have to do that extra work. And so that's definitely something that we're looking at Act to Change, and something that I hope I know other organizations are doing doing as well. There's so many good questions. I would love to give you another one, which is, um, how do we create environments that are filling versus draining?
Yeah. Um, I think when I shared about that during the presentation, I spoke to this piece around community care. I really think about that a lot. I really think about who are the people that we spend our time with, and why do we spend our time with them, and what is it that we're looking for when we spend our time with them. And I think that's like more important than ever, because so many of us don't have the opportunity to engage with other people in like a physical sort of, you know, in-person way right now, right? Like we're all like just doing this virtually. And so the number one thing that I can think of there is to like just like think about, you know, who are the types of people that you really enjoy spending time with? Who are the people that you find yourself validated and affirmed by? And how do you just build in more opportunities to hang out with them? I have been a really big fan of like just making that like front and center, like putting that out there, right? Like I want to spend more time with you because I always walk away from our conversations like really excited and really happy, or like you're always a really nice person. I'd love to like hang out more often, right? Like it doesn't have to be weird to like just like put this out there and like share. That's the reason why we're drawn to people.
Yeah, I also think that, you know, we have such a culture of uplifting people who work really hard, which is a good thing. I mean, I said it when I introduced you, Richard. I said like you've been a tireless and passionate board member, and being tireless is important. But I also, but I also feel like we also need to respect and create a culture of reward around um, recognizing that we need to fill up, and
Yeah.
that taking the time to rest is as important as taking the time to be active and putting the message out there. So hopefully conversations like this continue to drive home that message. Uh,
That really makes me, oh, sorry, I knew you were about to ask another question. Sorry. I
yeah,
was
no.
going to share that like, yeah, so like a lot of the work that I'm doing professionally now is with adults, and like going into like professional organizations to talk about that. And so a big piece that I think about is like our managers and people with positional power within this organization also like modeling that, like they need that, right? Are like our managers, our senior leaders, or whatever folks, right? Are they also modeling and sharing, like really showing that it is okay to like take time to take care of yourself, right? Because if they're not doing it, then like it's really hard for folks without that power to feel like they can do it as well.
So speaking of management, a question came in that, and this might be, I think it's probably outside of my purview, but what are some concrete steps an organization can take to prevent racist incidents, and microaggressions?
Oh gosh, preventing is really hard. And like, I mean that like very genuinely because so much of what is normalized in professional culture is rooted in white supremacy culture. That's like a whole thing. I could do like a whole like an hour like on that. That's like another thing. But it's really hard to prevent them. Just like lifting that up, right? There are things we can do, right? Like, excuse me, losing my voice here slowly. There are things we can do around like diversity, equity, inclusion around like bringing in speakers, around bringing in workshops to really promote anti-bias, anti-racism trainings, right? There's like a lot of that that's out there right now. And those things are like incredibly important. So like there's tons of resources for folks to find and Google for that. But I also want to lift up that like there's a limitation, right? Like these things are going to happen. And really, I think, you know, organizations should also prepare themselves for how are they going to respond when these things happen, right? What is the process? What is the system that you have set up to repair the harm that has been done? Because it's going to happen at some point, right? And the prevention work is deeply important, like truly critically important, but it can only go so far. Like just as much as that is necessary, we also have to be thinking about how are we going to respond and heal and repair damage when these things happen.
Yeah, and I would just, you know, say, like, I know one of the big things that we're trying to do here is create space for open conversations and to listen to people. And I saw listening come up so many times in the chat box. And so I also think including, you know, I'm not a corporate organizer, but including employees and asking them what would be helpful to them is important, in the same way that I know that at Act to Change, a big part of our work is going out to young people and asking them what they need and how they actually think we can help them, as opposed to just making those assumptions. So it's something that, you know, if you're in an environment that doesn't feel safe, I would encourage you to have conversations with people at the higher levels about including the entire staff in and what those solutions look like. All right, we just have a few minutes left, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. But I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Richard, and also a huge thank you to all of our participants. Everyone was so engaged. I know why you had people not be able to see others' comments, but I just want to say that there was so many comments were flying by. So many people were actively participating in it, which was super exciting. We haven't actually done a webinar in this way here at Act to Change, so it was really cool to see how it worked and how you made it all come together. So thank you so much to you, Richard, for leading that. I also want to thank a number of folks, not just for putting this event together, but also for working with Act to Change over the summer. So you all might have noticed that our social media game has amped up this week. That is because of 3 student interns from the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership, CAPAL, the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership. Their names are Komal Kamdar, Kathleen Malari, and Carolyn Im. On top of the incredible social media graphics they designed, they also researched and wrote, as Richard mentioned, a 40-page toolkit about Asian American history and anti-bullying. And this toolkit is available on our website at acttochange.org. So please go check it out. It's incredibly helpful for anyone who had questions on how to have these conversations. This toolkit is super valuable. And while you're at our website, please take the pledge to end bullying. I want to thank a few of our partners at Stop AAPI Hate and their interns who worked really hard to create curriculum that students and teachers can use to learn more about the AAPI community. These high school students worked on a number of different topics like intersectionality and the Japanese American incarceration camps of World War II. And we are super excited to have their work up on our website. That's going to be featured in the next coming weeks. And lastly, we are going to continue these classroom convos. We'd love to get your feedback on how we can do better. So we're going to be dropping a link in the, sorry, I'm just getting this information. We're going to be dropping a link in the chat right now. So please, please click on that link, take a survey that's in that link, and that's how we're going to get some feedback from all of you. So please do that. And lastly, we want to continue these classroom combos. Nope, sorry, I'll show you if you, oh my gosh, guys, sorry, I'm just like, there's so many things I want to say to you, and I'm going to say them all. If you are an educator or a youth and you are interested in leading a future classroom convo, please email us with your ideas on what you'd like to teach at info@acttochange.org so that we can continue these conversations. Again, thank you all of us. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Thank you to all the organizations that help promote and live stream. They are Next Shark, Angry Asian Man, Teach for America, Asian American News, Yam Yam F, Hate is a Virus, I Am Not a Virus, CAPE, Asian Americans, Advancing Justice, Stage 13, Helen Zia, Padma Lakshmi, Tan France, and Celia Au. We have such a huge coalition of supporters. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes here at Act to Change who worked very hard to make this happen. Together, we can end bullying. So please click on the link, download that survey, and send it back to us. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Richard.